It was the silence that hit me first. It wasn't the kind of quiet that comes with peace or calm, it was suffocating, heavy with unspoken things. I heard the car pull into the driveway, the familiar hum of the engine shutting off, the sound of her door creaking open and closed. Her footsteps on the gravel as she walked to the front door, but the noise felt distant, faint. It didn't reach me, not the way it used to. She stepped inside, and I stood there in the kitchen, not sure what to say, not sure if I even wanted to. The scent of sunblock filled the room, clinging to her clothes like a signature. I watched her as she entered, her sun-kissed skin glowing in the soft light from the window. She smiled, but it didn't quite meet her eyes. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice a little too light. I knew that tone, like she was trying to sound carefree, like nothing had changed, when everything had. I looked at her, trying not to let my confusion show. There was something different in the way she carried herself today, something that didn't sit right. My gaze shifted to her left hand, where her wedding ring should have been. My heart skipped a beat as my mind raced to catch up. She'd been gone for the weekend. A girl's trip, she'd said. A weekend away to recharge, to unwind. She'd been planning it for weeks, and I had encouraged her to go. I told her she deserved it. What kind of husband wouldn't? But now, looking at her, the first thing I noticed wasn't her tan or the glow on her skin, it was the absence of that simple, yet significant piece of jewelry. Her finger was bare. There was no ring. My stomach twisted in a knot, something cold and dark pooling in the pit of my stomach. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but I couldn't help it. My mind was already spinning, already crafting 1,000 possibilities, none of them good. Maybe she forgot it, maybe she took it off for a few days, thinking it would be easier to apply sunblock without it on. But something told me it wasn't that simple. I watched her closely as she put her bag down on the counter, still not meeting my gaze. She was avoiding it. Avoiding me. And that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Had fun? I asked, my voice betraying the tightness in my chest. I regretted it the moment the words left my mouth. My tone was too casual, too forced. She wouldn't buy it. She nodded, but the smile that followed didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, it was nice. Relaxing. I nodded, still staring at her hand, willing it to change, willing the ring to just appear out of thin air, but it didn't. It was gone. And the absence of it was so loud, it felt like the entire room was echoing with the sound of it. I opened my mouth to ask her about it, but my words were stuck. How do you ask about something so small, so seemingly insignificant, when everything in you screams that it means everything? Her eyes flickered toward me, and for the briefest moment, I saw something, guilt, maybe, pass across her face. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She turned away, moving toward the living room, but I couldn't take my eyes off her hand. My mind spiraled into overdrive, remembering the last few months. The small things. The way she'd been distant, preoccupied with something I couldn't put my finger on. The way she'd gotten defensive when I asked how her work was going, or when I brought up plans for the future. And there was that one time, 2 weeks ago, when she didn't pick up her phone when I called. She'd been out with her friends, she'd said later, but she sounded off, distracted, like she wasn't fully there. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just overthinking it. But the doubt was creeping in, gnawing at me like a slow poison. I could feel it, deep inside me, a whisper that kept telling me I wasn't imagining things. That something was wrong. I was thinking about making dinner, I said, finally finding my voice again. But my words felt empty, like I was just going through the motions, trying to fill the space between us with something, anything, that could push the question that burned on the tip of my tongue back down. Dinner sounds good, she replied, her voice soft and distant. Too distant. She moved around the kitchen, opening cabinets and pulling out things for the meal, but her movements lacked the energy they usually had. She seemed off. Like she was somewhere else entirely. I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me, suffocating the air around us. She was acting like everything was fine. Like she was still the woman I married, the woman I thought I knew. But that ring, her bare finger, was screaming at me, pulling at the thread of all the doubt and uncertainty that had been building for months. I glanced at her again, watching her chop vegetables, her focus entirely on the task at hand. But it wasn't just the ring. It was the way she avoided looking at me, like she was afraid of what she might see in my eyes. The way her posture seemed guarded, closed off. The way she hadn't once mentioned anything about the weekend or how it went. No stories, no excitement, nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but it wasn't enough. The question that had been growing inside me, the one I was so desperate to ask but so afraid to voice, was finally breaking free, clawing its way to the surface. "What happened to your ring?" I asked, my voice low but firm. It came out before I could stop it, like a breath I couldn't hold in any longer. For a moment, she froze, her hand hovering midair as she chopped the carrots. Then, slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes meeting mine for the first time since she walked through the door. She stopped herself, a slight tremble in her voice. "I took it off for the weekend." I stared at her, trying to read the expression on her face, but it was unreadable. Empty. She was lying, and I knew it. I could feel it in the way her eyes darted to the side, avoiding mine. I could hear it in the hesitation in her voice. There was more to it. So much more that she wasn't telling me. But what was it? What had happened over the weekend? The silence stretched out between us, thick and uncomfortable. She didn't offer any explanation, and I didn't press for more, yet. But the more I stared at her, the more I realized something. I wasn't just angry or confused. I was terrified. Terrified that this was the beginning of the end. Terrified that I was losing her, and I had no idea why. Her finger, empty, bare, and cold, was the symbol of it all. It was the first crack in the foundation of our marriage, the first sign that everything might not be as it seemed. And that was the part that hurt the most. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know where to go from here. But I knew one thing for sure, something had changed, and it wasn't just her tan. And it wasn't just the ring. The minutes dragged on after that, each second thicker than the one before. I stood frozen in place as she went back to chopping the carrots, now moving mechanically, as if trying to convince herself, and me, that everything was normal. But nothing felt normal. Not anymore. My heart raced in my chest, hammering like a drum, as my mind replayed everything. Her words. Her actions. That ring, or lack thereof. The questions that had been swirling inside me were now demands, each one louder than the last, clawing to be heard. I knew I had to say something. I had to break the tension, but how could I when my mind felt like a tornado, whipping through a storm of confusion, doubt, and the sharp sting of betrayal? My eyes were glued to the bare skin where her ring should have been. I couldn't tear them away, couldn't ignore the emptiness it represented. "So, how was the trip?" I asked, my voice sounding more distant than I intended. I needed to know what had happened. I needed to know why her ring was gone and why she hadn't even thought to mention it. Why she hadn't seemed eager to share her weekend with me, as if it was just another day away, another thing to get through. Her response was casual, but it didn't match her body language. "It was nice. I really needed the break," she replied, her eyes flitting toward me for just a second before quickly darting away. "Right," I muttered, not sure what to say next. She seemed so distant. Even when she spoke, it didn't feel like she was here with me. It was like she was reciting a script, rehearsing lines from some story that wasn't ours. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. I tried to focus on the words, the conversation, but all I could see was the hollow space on her finger, and it felt like it was growing, expanding, until it was swallowing up the entire room. "Where'd you go, exactly?" "You never said," I asked, trying to sound nonchalant, even though the words came out jagged and rough. "We just stayed at a little beach house down the coast." "Nothing fancy," she answered quickly, her tone still too light, like she was trying to brush past the question. It wasn't an answer. It was a dodge. I wasn't buying it. "You didn't mention a beach house when you were talking about the trip," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the sharpness creeping in. "I guess I forgot to mention it." "I don't know," she muttered, her hands suddenly busy with the chopping board, as if she couldn't meet my gaze for long. Her fingers worked at a frantic pace, chopping the carrots with too much force, like she was trying to distract herself from the conversation, from me. The more she avoided eye contact, the more my chest tightened, the more the suspicion gnawed at me. It was like a knot had tied itself around my heart, pulling tighter with every word that she wasn't saying. The ring. The way she was acting. Her lack of transparency about the weekend, it all pointed to something, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was all in my head. But I had learned it over the years that gut feelings weren't something you could easily ignore, no matter how much you wished you could. Did you meet someone while you were there?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. I hadn't meant to say that. I hadn't even realized I was thinking it. But once they were out in the open, they were like a weight, hanging between us, impossible to ignore. For the first time since she came home, she froze. Her knife paused midair, the carrot in front of her forgotten. I could see her body tense up, her shoulders lifting slightly, like she had just been caught in something she didn't want me to know. No, she said, a little too quickly. Of course not. I didn't buy it. Not for a second. I stayed silent, watching her closely, searching her face for any sign of truth. Her lips were tight, her eyes darting everywhere but toward me. The air between us crackled with tension, thick with everything she wasn't saying, everything that she was hiding. Finally, she looked up, her eyes avoiding mine but trying to appear casual, like she wasn't holding something back. I just needed some space, you know? Some time away to think. Her voice was softer now, like she was trying to pacify me, to calm whatever storm was brewing between us. But it didn't calm anything. If anything, it made it worse. Space. Time to think. Those were words I had heard before, not from her, but from people who had drifted away, people who had already made up their minds. People who were done. You needed space. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I was trying not to sound desperate, trying to keep the edge out of my words, but it was hard. So hard. Yeah, I needed a break from everything. From everything, she repeated, this time her voice breaking just a little, like she was struggling to convince herself. My mind raced. What did that mean? What was she really trying to tell me? I wanted to reach out to her, to hold her, to make everything go back to the way it was. But the distance between us wasn't just physical. It was more than that. It was a gulf that had opened up, wide and deep, and I couldn't see how to bridge it. I could feel my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to anchor myself. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Finally, I cleared my throat, trying to push past the raw ache in my chest. Do you still love me? The words came out broken, like I had to force them from somewhere deep inside me. It felt like the most fragile question I had ever asked, as if the answer could shatter everything between us. She didn't answer immediately, and that silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. She looked at me then, her eyes soft and full of something I couldn't place. It wasn't warmth or affection, it wasn't anything comforting. I don't know anymore, she said, her voice barely a whisper. And it was those words, the ones that hung in the air like a death sentence, that sliced through me. She didn't know. I didn't know how to breathe after that. How do you breathe when the person you love, the one you thought you knew, says something like that? How do you breathe when they admit, without hesitation, that they don't know if they love you anymore? My world tilted, and I struggled to keep my footing. She glanced down at her bare hand, then quickly looked away. She never mentioned the ring. Not once. And in that moment, I knew, whatever had happened on that trip, whatever had changed between us, it was already too late. The silence between us was more than just a lack of conversation, it was the space that had been growing for months, years, and now it was too big to ignore. I was standing there, desperately holding on to the shards of a life I thought I understood, and she was already halfway out the door. The words lingered in the air like smoke, too dense to push away. I don't know anymore. The fact that she'd said it without hesitation hit harder than anything else. Not because she was cold, but because the uncertainty in her voice seemed real, and real things had a way of changing everything. I couldn't look at her anymore. My eyes kept flitting to the empty space on her finger, the skin that had once been so familiar to me now looked like it had been erased. I should have said something, done something, but I couldn't bring myself to interrupt the suffocating silence. Instead, I focused on the sink, on the sound of the water running, on anything that didn't have to do with her and me and this painful reality that we were slipping through each other's fingers like sand. It was my fault, wasn't it? I should have been the one to notice the distance growing between us. But I didn't. I hadn't. And now we were here, standing in this space where we could no longer pretend that everything was okay, that we weren't falling apart. Maybe I had taken her for granted. Maybe I hadn't seen the cracks she had been trying to hide. But looking at her now, the way her hands gripped the countertop so tightly, I wondered if she'd been slipping away long before she'd taken off that ring. I swallowed hard. Is it someone else? I wasn't proud of asking the question, but the thought had been gnawing at me, and I had to know. The pain of not knowing was worse than anything she could say. I needed the truth, even if it shattered me. She froze, her breath catching, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes, a mixture of guilt and shame, something I hadn't seen in years. She was fighting with herself, struggling to answer, and the seconds dragged on like an eternity. Finally, she shook her head, slowly, as if weighing each movement, each word that came next. No, she said, her voice small, almost defeated. No, it's not someone else. The relief that washed over me was fleeting, gone as quickly as it had come. Because even though she hadn't found someone else, something was still broken. Something had changed, and I could feel it, deep in the pit of my stomach. I took a step closer, but the distance between us felt like miles. Then what happened? What changed? I don't understand, I said, my voice trembling now. The desperation was creeping in, but I couldn't stop it. I needed an answer. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, I saw the vulnerability there. The sadness. It was the kind of sadness that made me want to reach out and hold her, but I knew better. I couldn't fix it. Not now. Not with her so far away from me. I don't know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I've been feeling lost for a while now. And I thought maybe being away from everything would help, but, her words trailed off, and the silence returned, heavier than before. I thought I needed space to figure things out. But now I'm just, more confused. I nodded, trying to understand, trying to grasp at whatever thread of clarity I could. And the ring? I asked. What happened to the ring? Her face twisted, and I saw the hesitation in her eyes, like she was battling with herself, trying to find the right words. I didn't want to wear it anymore, she admitted finally, the words sharp and raw. I couldn't. I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't know what to say when the person you loved, the person you'd vowed to spend your life with, told you they couldn't even bear to wear their wedding ring. The silence between us thickened again, wrapping itself around everything we'd built, strangling it little by little. I tried to focus on what she was saying. Tried to understand the pain behind her words, but it was hard. How could I understand something that felt so foreign to me? How could I fix something I didn't even know how to name? You're not leaving me, are you? I blurted, the question slipping out before I could stop it. I wasn't prepared for it, but once it was out there, I couldn't take it back. The vulnerability in my voice was there for both of us to hear, and I hated it. I hated how weak I sounded, how scared I was to hear her answer. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her eyes darted away, as if she couldn't meet mine. And that was enough of an answer for me. I exhaled sharply, feeling my chest constrict. The words I was afraid to hear hung in the air, unspoken, but they didn't need to be said. I could see it in the way she avoided looking at me, in the way her body was pulling away, inch by inch. It wasn't just the ring. It was everything. We were two people, standing on opposite sides of a widening gap, and no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't bridge it. I need time, she said finally, her voice soft, distant. I need to think about everything. About us. I nodded numbly, even though I didn't understand. She needed time. And in that moment, I realized something that tore through me like a knife. I wasn't sure if time would fix anything. Time wasn't going to make the emptiness inside me go away. It wasn't going to heal the space where her ring should have been. I'll give you time, I said, though the words tasted bitter. I didn't want to give her time. I didn't want to lose her. But if that was what she needed, I couldn't stop her. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the air too thick to breathe. I could feel the walls closing in, and I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I had no words left. She turned back to the carrots, chopping with mechanical precision, but I could see the tremor in her hands. She was trying to focus, to bury herself in the mundane task to avoid the reality we were both facing. But I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay. I don't want to lose you, I said, my voice cracking as the words left my lips. It was all I could say. All I had left. She didn't answer. Instead, she kept chopping, each slice of the knife against the cutting board echoing through the room, filling the silence that neither of us seemed able to break. And in that silence, I realized, we were already losing each other, piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The days that followed were like walking through a fog. Each step felt heavy, each moment stretched out longer than the last, and yet, nothing seemed to move forward. We existed in the same house, shared the same space, but it was as if we were living in different worlds. I could feel the distance between us like a physical wall. It was in the way she moved, the way she didn't look at me when she passed by. It was in the empty bed beside me at night, the silence that wrapped itself around us even though we were in the same room. I kept waiting for the inevitable confrontation, for her to tell me what she was feeling, what was going on in her head. But there was nothing. Silence, every day. And I wondered if that silence was her answer. Maybe she didn't need to say the words for me to understand. Maybe I already knew. Maybe I was just too scared to admit it. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing, replaying every conversation, every look, every moment that had led us here. Had I missed something? Had I been blind to all the signs that were there, hidden in plain sight? How could I not have noticed? How could I not have seen her slipping away, bit by bit? I started noticing the small things. The way she smiled less, the way she was always looking at her phone, the way her laugh didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. I saw it, but I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't sure if I should confront her, push her to talk, or if I should wait for her to come to me when she was ready. But nothing ever came. Her phone seemed to be her constant companion now. Every time I caught a glimpse of it, I found myself wondering who she was talking to, who she was texting, what she was hiding. The notifications that popped up on her screen were like invisible daggers, each one twisting a little deeper into my gut. I couldn't help it. I was becoming obsessed with it, with her silence, with the way she seemed to be drifting further away with every passing day. One evening, I returned home later than usual. The house was quiet, too quiet. I walked through the door, expecting to find her in the kitchen or curled up on the couch, but she wasn't there. The house felt empty, hollow, and I immediately felt a pang of panic in my chest. Where was she? I checked the bathroom, the study, the bedroom. She wasn't in any of them. It was when I went to the kitchen that I saw it, her phone, lying face up on the countertop. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark room, and for a split second, I froze. A flood of emotions surged through me. Should I pick it up? Should I look? It was wrong, I knew that, but it felt like the only answer to the gnawing questions that had been eating away at me. My fingers hovered over the phone, shaking with hesitation. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. If I picked it up, I might find something I wasn't ready to see. But if I didn't, the uncertainty would haunt me forever. I took a deep breath and grabbed the phone. The screen lit up, and my eyes immediately went to the notification that was sitting there, waiting. It was a message, but not from her. No, it wasn't from her at all. The name on the screen was someone I didn't recognize, Alex Blueheart. My throat tightened, and for a moment, everything seemed to blur. I tried to convince myself that it didn't mean anything, that maybe it was a friend, a colleague. But the little heart emoji next to the name, the way it stood out so casually against the simplicity of the text, it made my stomach twist. I quickly swiped open the message. The words were casual, almost too casual, but they still made my pulse quicken. Had fun tonight. Let's do it again soon. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Face throwing. My breath caught in my throat, and I immediately felt the color drain from my face. I stared at the screen, my heart beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. My eyes moved over the text again, trying to make sense of it, trying to piece together the puzzle. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, staring at her phone, feeling like the world had suddenly shifted beneath me. The floor felt unsteady, as if I was about to fall into something I couldn't come back from. I had to calm down. I had to breathe. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't. The message was there, and I couldn't unsee it. I tried to put the phone down, but my hands shook too much to let go. Before I could think twice, I opened up her contacts. My thumb hovered over the name. Alex. Who was he? What was going on? But before I could dig deeper, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway. I quickly shoved the phone into my pocket, trying to act normal, but I couldn't hide the way my heart was racing, the way my body tensed with a new sense of urgency. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide when she saw the expression on mine. I couldn't hide it. I wasn't good enough at pretending anymore. She looked at me for a long moment, her gaze searching mine, as if she was trying to read something in my eyes, but I wasn't sure what to say, what to do. I wanted to ask her who Alex was, why she was texting him, but the words wouldn't come. The space between us had shifted. There was no going back from this. She trailed off, her voice shaking. I didn't expect you to see that. I swallowed hard, the words finally breaking free. Who is Alex? Her face tightened, and for a second, I saw something in her eyes. Guilt. Fear. Maybe even regret. But she didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer to me, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out. I'm sorry, she whispered, but I couldn't tell if she was apologizing for the message or for something deeper. The question burned in my throat, but I couldn't ask it. Not yet. I couldn't bring myself to hear the answer, even though I already knew it was coming. I'm sorry, she repeated, her voice barely audible. But it was too late for apologies. Something had changed. Something had been broken that I couldn't fix. The silence that followed her apology was deafening. I stood there, trying to process what had just happened, the message, her words, the truth that had been sitting in front of me for who knows how long. But all I could do was stare at her, waiting for something to make sense. Waiting for an explanation. She had hurt me. She had pulled away, and I didn't even know when it had started. The walls that had once held our lives together now seemed like an impenetrable fortress. How did I not see it? How could I have been so blind to the gradual erosion of something I thought was solid, something I thought was real? She stepped back, the space between us growing wider, the weight of the truth too heavy for either of us to carry. Her eyes darted to the floor, then back to mine, as if searching for something, anything, that could make this moment easier. But nothing would. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice wavering. I never wanted to hurt you. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep breathing, to keep my voice steady, even though my chest felt like it was about to collapse. Then why did you? Her eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she tried to find the words. I don't know. I got lost, somewhere along the way. Things changed. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to talk to you. The words she said felt rehearsed, like she had prepared them in her mind, but when they came out, they didn't make anything better. They only deepened the ache in my chest. I felt betrayed. I felt like I had been living a lie. Who is Alex? I asked again, the question hanging in the air, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. She hesitated, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. Just someone I met. Someone I don't know. It wasn't supposed to go this far. You've been lying to me, I whispered, the reality of the situation sinking in like a stone in my stomach. For how long? Her face flushed, her eyes lowering again. A few months, she said quietly, as if confessing to something that had already torn her apart. I never meant for it to be like this. I was confused. I didn't know what to do. I shook my head, trying to keep the emotions from overwhelming me. You could have talked to me. We could have fixed this together. I know, she said, her voice breaking. But I was too scared. I didn't know if you would still want me once the truth came out. I felt a wave of frustration crash over me. How could she think that? How could she think I would leave her if she was honest with me? I was standing right there, desperate to make things work, and yet, she had chosen to keep pushing me away instead of coming to me when things started to fall apart. So you just kept it from me? I asked, my voice trembling. You just let it fester until it exploded. I'm sorry, she whispered again, her voice barely audible. I took a step back, suddenly feeling the weight of everything we had built together, everything we had shared, slipping through my fingers like sand. The love we had, the memories, the promises, it was all disintegrating before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I don't know what to do anymore, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I don't know who you are anymore. Her face crumpled, and she reached out to me, but I pulled away. I couldn't let her touch me, not like this, not when everything had changed. I love you, she said, her voice trembling with desperation. I love you, but I was lost. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to tell you. I looked at her, searching her face for any sign that this was all some kind of nightmare I was going to wake up from, but it wasn't. This was real. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and no amount of love could undo the betrayal that I was feeling. I don't think you understand, I said softly, the words cutting deeper than I intended. You've already made your choice. And now I have to make mine. The weight of that decision sat heavily on my shoulders. What was I supposed to do now? Stay and try to rebuild something that had already been broken, or walk away and try to heal the wound she had inflicted? Her face crumpled, and the tears started falling, but I couldn't find it in myself to comfort her anymore. There was nothing left to say. No more chances. No more second-guessing. I can't stay here, not like this, I said, my voice steady but my heart breaking with every word. I need time. I need space. Her body trembled as she nodded, the tears streaming down her face. I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even deserve your forgiveness. I didn't know if I could forgive her. Maybe in time, I would, but in that moment, the hurt was too fresh, too raw. I wasn't ready for that kind of healing. Not yet. I'm leaving, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it isn't. She didn't try to stop me. Instead, she just stood there, watching me as I turned and walked out of the room, the weight of everything we had shared pressing down on me with every step I took. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, the silence of the house closing in around me, suffocating me. I could still hear her voice in my head, whispering apologies, but it was too late. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I realized that the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was walking away from everything I thought I knew. Walking away from a love I thought would never end. But as I walked down the driveway, the streetlights flickering overhead, I knew there was no going back. There was no way to fix what was broken. Not anymore. And I had to let it go.